The biting wind whipped around the crumbling edges of the small shack, whistling through cracks in the walls like a mournful ghost. Inside, Anya huddled closer to her sleeping child, the thin blanket offering little protection against the cold seeping from the damp earth floor. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, a dull ache that had become a constant companion, a cruel reminder of the chasm between them and those who knew comfort. Every day was a battle simply to exist, a desperate scramble for scraps in a world that seemed determined to crush the poor underfoot. They were trapped, not by physical bars, but by the invisible chains of poverty, tightening with every passing hour. The weight of it all felt like a physical burden on Anya's chest, stealing her breath, extinguishing the last embers of hope. But giving up wasn't an option, not with her child depending on her. This crushing despair, this stark unfairness, demanded a fight, a resilience forged in the furnace of suffering. If you feel the injustice in Anya's plight, show your support. Like this video and subscribe to follow her journey and witness the power of the human spirit rising against overwhelming odds. Anya rose before dawn, the familiar ache in her joints a dull echo of her weariness. The faint, musty smell of damp earth clung to everything. She had tried every avenue she knew, back-breaking day labor that paid pennies, begging at the market gates, even selling the few precious trinkets her mother had left her. Every door had been slammed shut, every hope extinguished. The city, with its gleaming towers and bustling streets, felt like a hostile entity, indifferent to her struggle. Her worn shoes slapped against the cracked pavement as she walked, the crisp morning air doing little to lift her spirits. She saw the grand houses in the distance, silent sentinels of wealth, their windows reflecting the sunrise she could only watch from the outside. The thought of crossing that divide, of entering one of those opulent, unfamiliar worlds, filled her with a mix of dread and a desperate flicker of hope. A rumor had reached her, whispered among others scavenging for work, a live-in maid position in a prominent household. It was the work of the truly desperate, demanding absolute submission, long hours, and entry into a life entirely alien to her own. Yet, starvation was a more terrifying prospect. It was a plunge into the unknown, a surrender of the last vestiges of her independence, but it offered a chance, however small, to escape the crushing certainty of their present fate. The thought of her child's hungry eyes propelled her forward, towards the imposing gates of the wealthy estate. The heavy iron gates swung inward with a low groan, a sound swallowed by the vastness of the estate. The car glided up the long, winding drive, past manicured gardens that looked impossibly green even in the late afternoon sun. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion of stone and glass, reflecting the sky like a polished mirror. Inside, the air was cool, scented faintly with lilies and expensive wood polish. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stillness. Every surface gleamed, the marble floors, the polished mahogany banisters, the intricate gold leaf tracing patterns on the ceiling. It was a world away from everything she had ever known, a place that felt less like a home and more like a museum of wealth. A sense of awe warred with a prickle of intimidation. They appeared from the drawing room, a perfectly composed couple. Mr. Thorne was tall and impeccably dressed, his smile wide but somehow fixed. Mrs. Thorne was slender, adorned with delicate jewelry that whispered of immense value with every slight movement. Their voices were smooth, welcoming, filled with polite inquiries about her journey and her first impressions of their magnificent residence. They guided her through the lower level, pointing out features, each detail more extravagant than the last. But beneath the polished surface, subtle cracks began to show. When she admired a particular painting, Mrs. Thorne's hand rested possessively on her husband's arm, her smile tightening just a fraction. Mr. Thorne's eyes, though smiling, held a strange, assessing coldness that lingered a moment too long. They spoke of expecting absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty, their tone shifting subtly from welcoming hosts to quiet commanders. As they discussed her duties, the casual mention of checking in regularly or being available whenever needed felt less like flexibility and more like constant surveillance. Later, alone for a moment in the cavernous hallway, the silence of the house felt heavy, almost watchful. The grandeur suddenly seemed overwhelming, the opulent details feeling less like decoration and more like bars. The polite smiles she had received replayed in her mind, each one now tinged with a hint of something unsettling, something controlling. This wasn't just a job. It felt like she had stepped into a world where the cost of entry was far higher than she had anticipated. The air, once cool and scented with lilies, now felt stiflingly warm, trapping her in a gilded cage. The air in the small office felt suddenly colder, even though the thermostat hadn't changed. It began subtly, like a faint, unpleasant odor you couldn't quite place. A request slipped onto her desk late on Friday afternoon, demanding completion by Monday morning. A task twice the usual workload, delivered with a casual indifference that felt like a slap. She stared at the printed words, the ink stark and demanding against the cheap paper, a knot tightening in her stomach. This wasn't standard procedure. It felt targeted. Then came the meetings. She'd offer an idea, carefully considered, backed by data she diligently compiled. A sharp, dismissive sound from across the table, a quick shake of a head, and the conversation would sweep past her as if she hadn't spoken at all. The silence that followed her voice was deafening, a void where acknowledgement should have been. She began to shrink inward, her shoulders subtly slumping, her gaze drifting towards the scuff marks on the floor rather than meeting anyone's eye. It wasn't just that her ideas were ignored. It was the way she herself was treated, as if she were an interruption, an irrelevant detail in the important flow of their work. A colleague paused by her desk, ostensibly to chat, but the words dripped with condescension.
Still wading through that report, are we? Thought you'd be faster. It's not exactly rocket science, is it?
The smile didn't reach her eyes, which held a flat, unkind glint. Another time she was actively excluded. Information vital to her work was shared in hallway conversations she wasn't privy to. Decisions made in impromptu gatherings she wasn't invited to join. She'd discover crucial changes too late, leaving her scrambling to catch up, feeling incompetent and isolated. The vibrant energy she'd once felt upon joining this team was draining away, replaced by a persistent, low-grade anxiety that hummed beneath her skin. Every interaction became fraught with potential pitfalls, every request a test of her worth. Doubt began to creep in, a chilling whisper in her mind. Was she imagining it? Was she overly sensitive? The casual nature of the disrespect made it hard to point to, like trying to catch smoke. It left no bruises, only a dull, aching hurt deep in her chest, and a growing fear that she was trapped in a place where her value was actively being diminished. She felt a palpable sense of invisibility settling over her, thick and suffocating. The vibrant world outside the office walls seemed distant, the sunlight streaming through the window a cruel reminder of a warmth she no longer felt inside. This was not the challenging, rewarding environment she'd expected. It was becoming a subtle, daily erosion of her spirit, planting the first thorny seeds of despair. The cruelest part was the quietness of it all, the insidious way mistreatment could take root, not with shouts and accusations, but with averted eyes and carelessly chosen words. The air within the house grew thick with unspoken tension, a constant, heavy weight pressing down. It clung to the furniture, seeped into the very walls, and settled coldest in the pit of Ilara's stomach. Each day brought not just the sunrise, but a fresh wave of carefully crafted words designed to diminish her spirit. What began as subtle digs had sharpened into pointed spears, launched with unnerving precision by those she was forced to share a roof with. The dining table, once a place for shared meals, became a stage for her humiliation. She would sit, fork poised over a plate that suddenly tasted like ash, as barbed comments flew across the linen.
Honestly, Ilara, did you even try with that dress? Or did you just pull the first thing you found on the floor?
The voice dripped with false concern, a cruel amusement dancing in the speaker's eyes. It wasn't just the open mockery. There was the insidious drip of gaslighting, making her question her own reality. A shared history would be rewritten before her eyes, events twisted to paint her as forgetful, incompetent, or overly sensitive.
You remember it that way. That's not what happened at all. You always twist things, don't you? Or maybe you just can't keep track anymore.
A dismissive wave of a hand accompanied the words, erasing her truth like dust from a surface. She felt a chilling isolation spreading through the rooms. Laughter from another part of the house sounded hollow, alien, a reminder of the impenetrable barrier that had been erected between her and any sense of belonging. The scent of familiar perfumes or cooking spices, once comforting, now seemed tainted, a bitter overlay on the palpable tension. She walked on eggshells across floors that creaked like accusing voices, each step echoing her growing fear of drawing unwanted attention. The simple act of opening a door felt like stepping onto a battlefield, bracing for the next verbal assault. The world outside seemed impossibly far away. The walls of the house expanding not outwards to offer space, but inwards, constricting her breath, her thoughts, her very hope. Sleep offered little respite. The echoes of harsh words and cutting laughter pursued her into restless dreams. The escalating abuse was a physical cage, tightening its grip, leaving her feeling utterly alone and consumed by a profound, gnawing despair. She was trapped, and the walls were closing in. The air in the dimly lit workshop felt perpetually heavy, thick with the scent of old wood dust and unspoken misery. It was there, under the unforgiving gaze of the overseer, that the calculated cruelty truly began to unveil itself. One afternoon, a small, intricate piece of carved work lay broken on the floor near the corner where she usually worked. Before she could even react, a sharp voice cut through the quiet scraping sounds.
You did this. Carelessness costs money.
The accusation hung in the air, cold and absolute, despite the fact she had been nowhere near that part of the room. She felt a knot twist in her stomach, the immediate shock giving way to a helpless panic.
I didn't touch it. I was here.
Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief, but her protests were met with a dismissive wave and a sneer that promised retribution. The lie was spoken, and the truth held no power in this place. Later that week, the exploitation took a different, more insidious form. The days were long, the physical labor draining, and the simple necessity of a moment's rest or a drink of water was becoming a luxury denied. She felt a constant thrumming ache in her temples. Her throat parched, her legs heavy with exhaustion. Requesting even a brief break was met with icy indifference or outright scorn.
Break time is over when we say it's over. Get back to work. Are you trying to be lazy?
The female overseer's voice dripped with contempt, her eyes like chips of ice, leaving no room for appeal. The deliberate withholding of basic human needs was a relentless pressure, a constant reminder of her vulnerability and their control. Each denied request was a chip away at her spirit, a quiet cruelty delivered with chilling efficiency. Then came the deductions, line item after line item, appearing on the flimsy payslip she received. A document often slipped into her hand with barely a glance. Small amounts at first, for damaged goods she never touched, for lost time she hadn't taken, for arbitrary rules violations never explained. But they added up, turning her already meager wage into something even smaller, barely enough to sustain her. The broken carving incident resulted in a deduction that wiped out nearly a day's pay. The cost of a moment's denied water break felt immeasurable in terms of physical suffering. Yet it too seemed to translate into some unseen fine. The pattern became horrifyingly clear. These weren't isolated incidents of oversight or strictness, but a systematic dismantling of her earnings, designed to keep her perpetually indebted and without recourse. The heavy paper documentation felt like stones tied to her ankles, dragging her deeper into a mire of despair. The calculated nature of these injustices stripped away hope, leaving her feeling utterly trapped. The conflict no longer just a matter of survival, but a fight against a deliberate, dehumanizing system of cruelty. The constant gnawing dread had become a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making each breath shallow and sharp. It wasn't just the words, cold and cutting as shards of glass, but the insidious way they twisted reality, making her doubt her own sanity, her own worth. The humiliation, a sticky film she couldn't wash away, coated every interaction. She felt trapped, a mouse cornered by a predator who toyed with its fear before the final strike. Sleep offered little respite, the torment replaying behind her eyelids, vivid and cruel. The taste of bile was a frequent companion, a bitter reminder of her helplessness. The air in the office, usually smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant, now seemed thick with unspoken malice. Every glance felt like a judgment, every whisper a conspiracy. She was sinking, and the surface felt miles away. Then something inside her snapped, not in violence or despair, but in a quiet, desperate refusal to be extinguished. A flicker of defiance ignited in the suffocating darkness. She wouldn't break. She wouldn't let them win. Justice felt like an impossible mountain, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path, however steep and perilous. The thought arrived like a sudden cool breeze on a sweltering day. Evidence, concrete, irrefutable proof of the relentless cruelty she endured. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small, smooth rectangle of her phone beneath her desk. It wasn't designed for covert operations, bulky and familiar, but it was all she had. The device felt heavy, a stone in her gut, yet paradoxically light with the fragile weight of her newfound resolve. Acquiring it wasn't the challenge. She owned it already. The challenge was using it, turning an everyday object into a weapon against her oppressors. The risk was staggering. Discovery meant not just losing her job, but potential legal repercussions. Further public humiliation, perhaps even retaliation she couldn't fathom. Fear pulsed through her veins, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The scent of her own fear seemed to fill the space around her. She practiced in secret, finding angles, learning how to keep the lens hidden while capturing a moment, a glance, a spoken word. Her fingers, clumsy with nerves, fumbled with the controls. The small record icon became a terrifying beacon. The thought of missing the crucial moment, or worse, being caught in the act, made her stomach clench. Each attempt felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. The fear was a constant companion, cold sweat prickling her skin. But beneath it, a fierce, protective fire began to burn. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about fighting back, about exposing the rot beneath the polished surface, about reclaiming her dignity, one terrifying, secretly recorded second at a time. The path was fraught with danger, the outcome uncertain, but for the first time in months, she felt a fragile, potent sense of hope blossoming in the wasteland of her despair. She was no longer just enduring. She was preparing to fight. The fluorescent lights of the office hummed, a constant, weary drone that mirrored the dull ache in her bones. Another day bled into another, each one a relentless cycle of unreasonable demands and unspoken threats. Her hands, raw from washing dishes and scrubbing floors, trembled slightly as she poured coffee for them, the steam rising in the chilly kitchen air. They watched her with eyes that saw only a servant, a tool to be used and discarded. The weight of their expectations pressed down, heavy and suffocating. But beneath the mask of weary compliance, a flicker of desperate resolve burned. Hidden deep within her pocket, a small device lay dormant, waiting. This was the core of her terrifying secret, the dangerous countermeasure against their cruelty. Every interaction, every cutting remark, every instance of their demeaning behavior became a potential piece of evidence. The air grew thick with tension whenever they were near, not just from their presence, but from her own pounding heart, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She waited for the right moment, her senses on high alert. She heard their voices from the adjacent room, the low, dismissive tone of his voice, the sharp, biting edge of hers. She crept closer, her bare feet silent on the cold tile floor, a chill running down her spine. The smell of stale cigar smoke and expensive perfume hung in the air. She could just make out their figures through the half-open doorway, silhouetted against the harsh office light. This was it. Now or never. With trembling fingers, she fumbled for the device, careful not to make a sound. Her palm felt slick with sweat. She pressed record, the tiny red light on the screen a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness of her situation. She held her breath, straining to capture their words.
And make sure she understands. Her services are dispensable. If she doesn't meet expectations, there are plenty of others.
A sharp, humorless laugh followed, dripping with malice.
Exactly. She's easily replaced. Keep her hungry, keep her scared. That's how you ensure loyalty.
A knot tightened in her stomach. She needed more. She edged slightly closer, the floorboards creaking ever so faintly. A sudden sound from inside startled her, a chair scraping back. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She darted back, pressing the device off, her heart hammering against her ribs as if trying to escape her chest. Had they heard? Seen? She leaned back against the wall, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The angry accusation, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, she heard footsteps moving away. Relief washed over her, leaving her weak and shaky. She had survived the moment. She had captured a fragment, a piece of the truth. It was a terrifying dance, this balancing act between servitude and espionage, each day a grueling performance of submission while secretly gathering the weapons for her eventual resurgence. The fear was a constant companion, a heavy cloak she wore from dawn till dusk, but the knowledge that she was building her case, brick by painstaking bit, dangerous brick, offered a fragile ember of hope in the crushing darkness. She tucked the device away, the metallic feel a small cold comfort against her skin. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she was no longer merely enduring. She was fighting back in the quiet, dangerous shadows of their own home. She watched the sterile glow of the monitor late into the night, the silence of her small room amplifying the mundane sounds captured by the hidden lens. Hour after hour of seemingly normal days scrolled by, the banality a stark contrast to the knot of apprehension that tightened in her chest. Then, a flicker of movement, a slight mishap in a busy corridor. A stack of folders slipped from a coworker's grasp, scattering papers across the floor. A minor incident, easily rectified. But then, a figure entered the frame, his face contorted in sudden rage. His voice, usually controlled, erupted like thunder, filling the small, digital world she observed. It wasn't just anger. It was a visceral, almost gleeful cruelty that twisted his features. He didn't just scold, he savaged, his words cutting deep, personal, and entirely disproportionate to the trivial accident.
You utterly useless, clumsy fool! Can't you even handle something as simple as this? You're a liability, a stain on this operation. Maybe you belong sorting trash, not touching anything of value.
The camera didn't move, but she could almost feel the coworker recoil, shrinking under the barrage. The air in the room seemed to grow thin, suffocating her through the screen. Then the other figure arrived, observing the scene with chilling detachment. Her expression was one of cold amusement, her eyes holding not an ounce of empathy. She added a remark that wasn't loud, but carried a sharp, pointed malice that felt even more poisonous than the shouting.
Honestly, some people takes a certain kind of failure to mess this up.
A low, humorless laugh followed, like the scraping of bone. The coworker didn't speak, simply knelt, trembling slightly, gathering the scattered pages under the weight of their cruel gaze. A chill, cold and sharp like ice, traced its way down her spine. This wasn't just difficult employers. This was something far darker. This was a deliberate, calculated demeaning of another human being for a minor mistake, a reveling in their discomfort. The memory of their dismissive words to her, their petty cruelties, suddenly coalesced into a terrifying pattern. This was their true nature, laid bare when they thought no one was watching. The antiseptic scent of her cleaning supplies, usually a source of quiet comfort, suddenly felt acrid, metallic, like fear and defiance mingling in her throat. There was no ambiguity left. The fear that had gripped her earlier began to recede, replaced by a hard, cold certainty. What she was doing, Documenting their actions was not just justified, it was essential. It was the only shield, the only weapon she possessed against this level of callousness. The footage wasn't just proof, it was a lifeline, a mirror, reflecting a darkness she now knew she had to expose. Her resolve hardened, setting like concrete in her heart. There was no turning back. The weight settled on her shoulders like damp wool, heavy and suffocating. Each morning brought a fresh wave of nausea, a sour taste of dread that coated her tongue before her feet even touched the cold floor. The relentless cycle of enduring the veiled insults and outright dismissals chipped away at her soul, leaving her feeling like a hollow shell. Loneliness was a constant companion, a silent echo in the vast, indifferent space that had once felt like a community. Colleagues she had trusted now averted their eyes, their silence a betrayal as profound as any spoken word. It was the quiet complicity that stung the most, a confirmation that she was truly alone in this fight. Adding to the crushing burden was the gnawing anxiety of her secret mission. The small concealed device felt like a hot ember against her skin, a constant reminder of the risks she was taking. Every glance felt scrutinizing. Every approaching footstep sent a jolt of panic through her veins. The simple act of recording the truth, of documenting the cruelty she faced daily, became a tightrope walk over an abyss. It demanded a vigilance that exhausted her more than any physical labor. Sleep offered little respite. Her dreams were a tangled mess of whispered threats and mocking laughter, leaving her waking up sweating, the phantom touch of betrayal still lingering on her mind. Internal conflict raged within her. One part screamed to give up, to retreat, to just walk away from the relentless pressure and the emotional agony. The thought of peace, of simply existing without this crushing weight, was seductive. But another part, forged in the fires of injustice she was witnessing and experiencing, clung desperately to the necessity of seeing this through. The truth had to come out. The unfairness could not stand unchallenged. Yet the cost felt unbearable at times. Tears welled unexpectedly, stinging her eyes, or a sudden tremor would shake her hands when she was alone. The world outside her torment felt distant, unreal. Simple joys felt muted, overshadowed by the pervasive gray cloud of her reality. There were moments, often late at night in the quiet dark, when desperation clawed at her throat. How much longer could she endure this? When would the turnaround she so desperately yearned for finally arrive? The pressure was mounting, threatening to shatter her completely, leaving her clinging to the fragile hope that the evidence she was gathering would one day justify the immense, soul-deep toll it was taking. The screen glowed with a harsh, unforgiving light in the quiet room. Outside, the city slept, but here the air was thick with the weight of accumulated moments, fragments of time captured and stored. She sat hunched over, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The faint hum of the hard drive a low thrum against the silence. A mug of cold tea sat untouched beside her, its warmth long gone, much like the initial heat of her anger. Now, only a cold, deep ache remained. She clicked the first file. The footage flickered, grainy but clear enough. There she was, unsuspecting, walking into a room. Then the voices started, low at first, then rising. It wasn't just one incident. The timeline unfolded, day after day, week after week. A pattern emerged, stark and undeniable. The subtle digs, the deliberate exclusions, the manufactured mistakes attributed to her. She saw herself trying to navigate the treacherous currents, confusion clouding her face in one clip, hurt in another. Then came the moments that stole her breath.
Honestly, did she really think that would work? So naive.
Another voice snickered.
Just a matter of time before she trips over her own feet. Saves us the trouble.
Laughter followed, a chilling sound that echoed in the silent room. It wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. The cold dread that had settled in her stomach intensified, spreading like ice through her veins. Another clip. A crucial email deliberately withheld. A meeting minutes later showing decisions made that directly undermined her work. The casual cruelty, the absolute lack of empathy, displayed with a chilling competence. Her initial pain watching these moments began to harden. The flush of shame and hurt receded, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. Her hands, which had trembled slightly at the start, now rested still and firm on the desk. Her gaze, initially full of a pained recognition, became focused, sharp. She fast-forwarded through stretches, skipping the moments she had already lived, searching for the undeniable threads that wove together the narrative of their actions. The clicks of the mouse were sharp, decisive sounds. This wasn't just her perception, not just her feeling wronged. This was objective proof. Timestamps, audio recordings, visual confirmation. The weight of the evidence was immense, pressing down on her, yet simultaneously lifting her. She knew what this meant. Using this footage wouldn't be quiet or easy. It would be a bomb detonating in the carefully constructed world she inhabited. The fallout would be immense, potentially costing her everything. Her career, her reputation, perhaps even her peace. The personal cost felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, a long drop below. A shiver traced its way down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was the cold touch of resolve. The ache in her chest was no longer just from hurt, but from the heavy, unyielding burden of truth. There was no turning back now. The evidence demanded action. Anya sat in the quiet hum of her small apartment, the world outside oblivious to the heavy weight in her hands, the digital files that held the undeniable truth. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, and her own anxiety, a cloying reminder of the risk she was contemplating. She was no warrior, no seasoned strategist, merely someone pushed to the precipice, clutching the very thing that could bring ruin upon her. Or perhaps, justice. The sheer power imbalance felt crushing. They were giants shielded by wealth and influence, and she was just one person with a memory stick. How could she ensure this evidence, this fragile hope, wouldn't be crushed before it saw the light? Releasing it haphazardly felt like throwing a spark onto wet wood. It would fizzle and die. It had to be a calculated strike, a carefully placed charge that would ignite public attention and make it impossible for the truth to be buried. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Night after night, bathed in the cool glow of her laptop screen, she meticulously researched methods of secure file transfer, explored platforms known for amplifying whistleblower stories, and studied the tactics of those who had successfully exposed powerful wrongdoers before her. Each click of the mouse felt monumental, each piece of information a potential step closer to freedom or a misstep into danger. The safest path wasn't always the most effective. Sending it through official channels felt like walking into a trap. Those channels were often clogged by the very systems she sought to expose. A direct, anonymous leak seemed fraught with peril, easily dismissed or traced back to her. Her mind raced through possibilities, discarding them one by one, the tension tightening like a vice in her chest. Then, a thought crystallized, born from the desperation and a flicker of defiant hope. What if she didn't just send it, but strategically seeded it? A specific kind of journalistic outlet, one known for tenacity and independence, with a network vast enough to disseminate the information rapidly once verified. That was the key. Not just release, but controlled release, designed to build unstoppable momentum. She spent hours encrypting the files, adding layers of digital anonymity like a craftsman building a shield. She planned the exact moment of contact, researching time zones and news cycles, aiming for peak visibility. It felt less like sending an email and more like launching a delicate probe into hostile territory. Her fingers trembled slightly as she prepared the final package, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. This wasn't just about exposing their lies. It was about reclaiming her life, about proving that truth, however small its messenger, could challenge entrenched power. The path was forged, risky but deliberate, marking her transformation from hunted to hunter. The air now carried a faint, metallic tang of resolve. A quiet click echoed in the small, dimly lit room, followed by the soft whir of a video file loading. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation and a cold dread that seemed to seep from the screen's pale light. On the monitor, familiar figures moved, shadows and colors resolving into stark, undeniable clarity. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every act of calculated cruelty was captured with chilling precision. It wasn't just sound and light. It was the palpable sense of a soul being chipped away, displayed for the world to see. The initial reaction was not sound, but a visceral gasp, a sharp intake of breath that felt like swallowing ice. The eyes watching widened, reflecting the terrible truth unfolding. A tremor started in the hands, spreading quickly, a full-body shudder that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. News spread through the tight-knit community, a wildfire sparked by irrefutable proof. Hushed whispers began in break rooms, escalated to furious phone calls between colleagues, and finally erupted into shocked disbelief and righteous anger that swept through the company's ranks like a tidal wave. The comfortable facade of normalcy shattered, replaced by a raw, exposed reality. Within the executive suites, a different kind of storm was brewing. Initial reports were met with stony skepticism, a wave of dismissal and denial washing over faces usually composed and authoritative.
Ridiculous. Fabricated. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here.
The voice was tight, strained, a desperate attempt to assert control over an uncontrollable narrative. But then, the footage itself landed on their desks, undeniable and brutal in its honesty. Disbelief curdled instantly into stark, naked panic. The color drained from faces, replaced by an ashen hue. Papers were shuffled frantically. Phone calls were made with trembling fingers. Voices rising, and they paced their plush offices like trapped animals, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear and the faint, acrid smell of desperation. The comfortable chairs, the expensive art, none of it offered solace from the digital ghost haunting their screens. They saw not just footage, but the end of their carefully constructed world. The game was no longer theirs to control. The tables had turned with a deafening crash, and the true climax had begun. The digital world, often a place of fleeting distraction, suddenly became a unified force. As the raw, undeniable footage tore through the interconnected veins of the internet, it ignited a firestorm. Screens glowed with a harsh, revealing light in countless darkened rooms as viewers watched, breath held tight in their chests, then expelled in a collective gasp of disbelief and fury. The initial ripple became a tsunami, crashing over social media platforms with unprecedented speed. Hashtags exploded, trending globally within hours. The silent images of cruelty and injustice spoke louder than any shouted accusation. A tangible wave of outrage pulsed through the digital sphere, a furious energy born from shared empathy and righteous anger. Anonymous faces from around the globe found common ground in their condemnation. Keyboards clattered furiously as comments flooded in, a deluge of shock, disgust, and demands for accountability. The sheer volume of reaction was overwhelming, a deafening roar that drowned out attempts at denial or deflection. This wasn't just online noise. The digital tremor registered in the real world. Traditional news outlets, initially hesitant, could no longer ignore the seismic shift happening beneath their feet. News desks scrambled, editors greenlit investigations, and the story migrated from trending feeds to breaking news banners across television screens and news websites. The narrative solidified, becoming undeniable fact for millions. The faces of the perpetrators, once shielded by indifference, were now inescapable, splashed across screens everywhere. Then the wheels of formal consequence began to turn. The intense public scrutiny forced institutions to act. Authorities who might have moved slowly, or not at all, found themselves under immense pressure. Police precincts received floods of calls. Labor boards initiated inquiries, and legal teams began compiling cases. The weight of public opinion, fueled by undeniable evidence, propelled the machinery of justice forward. Offices that had once dismissed pleas for help now opened files, their silence replaced by the hum of official investigation. The comfortable anonymity the employers had enjoyed vanished, replaced by subpoenas and the cold reality of legal proceedings beginning their slow, relentless march. It was as if the universe, after witnessing such imbalance, was finally unleashing its long-delayed karma, using the very tools of the modern world to correct a profound wrong. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, the powerful felt the ground shifting beneath their feet, and the faint, distant echo of reckoning began to grow louder. The digital world erupted, a firestorm sparked by her truth. She felt it like a physical blow, the sudden silence of her phone before it began its frantic, relentless buzz. News alerts flashed, emails poured in, social media feeds became a chaotic torrent of her name and the details of the injustice. A knot of icy dread tightened in her stomach, cold and sharp. This was it. The moment she had both longed for and dreaded. The first calls were from numbers she didn't recognize, hidden or blocked. Then came the sharp, cutting voice she knew instantly, a high-ranking executive from her former company, his tone laced with venom and disbelief.
What in God's name have you done? You've ruined everything. You think you can get away with this? We'll bury you in lawsuits. You have no idea the power you've just challenged.
His words were like hammer blows, each one chipping away at her fragile composure, highlighting the terrifying power disparity. The air grew thick with the unspoken threat, the sheer force of their resources arrayed against her. Panic flared, a hot wave washing over the icy fear. She looked around her small apartment, no longer a sanctuary, but a vulnerable point on a map. The silence outside her window seemed ominous, watchful. She needed to disappear, at least for a little while, to think, to breathe, to plan. With trembling hands, she threw essentials into a worn backpack. Clothes, her laptop, vital documents. The scent of old fabric and nervous sweat filled the air. Leaving her key on the counter felt like severing a tether, stepping off a cliff into the unknown. The city streets, usually familiar, now felt alien and watchful. Every passing car, every stranger's glance seemed potentially hostile. She kept her head down, the weight of the backpack and the heavier burden of her sudden notoriety pressing down on her shoulders. She sought refuge, not in a faceless hotel, but with an old friend who had messaged her earlier, a simple text offering a safe harbor amidst the storm. Reaching the small, quiet house on the edge of town felt like finding a small island in a raging ocean. The scent of brewing tea inside was a welcome comfort, a stark contrast to the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Here, away from the immediate glare, she began to sort through the deluge. Amidst the torrent of hate mail and disbelieving accusations, glimmers of hope appeared. Messages from strangers sharing similar experiences, offers of legal aid from unexpected quarters, words of encouragement from people she had never met. This first wave of support was small, against the crashing waves of challenge, but it was real, a lifeline in the dark. Navigating this new reality meant sifting through the noise, discerning genuine allies from potential pitfalls, understanding that her life, as she knew it, was irrevocably changed. The path ahead was shrouded in mist, filled with unseen dangers, but for the first time since the exposure, a faint, hesitant spark of resolve flickered within her chest. A cold dread settled over the opulent offices, a stark contrast to the confident hum that had once filled these halls. It began subtly, with stern letters delivered by hand, the thick paper feeling heavy with impending consequence. Then came the official summons, the sight of the legal documents like ice in their hands. The air, once thick with the scent of success and expensive coffee, now carried the metallic tang of fear. The whispers started in the city's financial district, quiet at first, then growing into a clamor. Investigations that had been private matters spilled into the blinding glare of public scrutiny. The faces that had graced magazine covers now flickered across news screens, framed by headlines of corporate misconduct and exploitation. The easy smiles faltered, replaced by tense, drawn expressions. Every glance felt like an accusation. Every conversation seemed to pause as they entered the room. The smooth marble floors of their headquarters felt suddenly slippery, unsafe. The culmination arrived, not with a bang, but with the chilling formality of a courtroom. The heavy wooden doors seemed to seal their fate. The scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air, but it was the palpable tension that truly suffocated. Under the harsh, unforgiving light, their carefully constructed personas crumbled. Cameras flashed, freezing moments of their raw vulnerability for the world to see. The judge's voice, calm but resonant with the weight of authority, cut through the hushed silence.
For the charges of...
The specific words, detailing the schemes and the harm they had inflicted, rained down like blows. They stood accused, stripped of their power and prestige. The feeling was overwhelming. The sharp intake of breath from onlookers, the cold reality of the law's reach. Their empire, built on the backs of others, began to visibly collapse. Stock prices plummeted, partners fled, and the social circles they had courted turned their backs. The phone calls stopped. The invitations vanished. The isolating silence was deafening. Their downfall was complete, a public spectacle of justice delivered. It was a stark, undeniable testament that actions, however carefully hidden or powerfully executed, carried an inevitable price. The scales, long tipped in their favor, had finally, dramatically, found their balance. The era of their impunity was over, replaced by the cold, hard consequences they had so callously ignored, proving that some debts, like those owed to fairness and decency, always came due. The silence that followed the storm was heavy, yet strangely comforting. A profound exhaustion settled over her, deeper than any physical tiredness she had ever known. It was the fatigue of a spirit finally allowed to rest, after years of relentless pressure. The air in the small, safe room felt different. Lighter, cleaner, free from the suffocating density of fear. She noticed the simple things, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the gentle sway of curtains in a breeze, the distinct scent of fresh coffee brewing in the morning. These small sensory anchor points grounded her in a reality that no longer felt hostile. Processing the trauma was not a single event, but a slow, arduous climb. The memories, sharp and painful, would surface unexpectedly, bringing with them the echo of that suffocating environment. She felt a deep tremor run through her body at times, an involuntary response to remembered dread. Therapists listened with infinite patience, helping her to untangle the knots of fear and self-blame that the oppression had woven into her being. She learned to breathe through the panic, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume her. Each session felt like shedding another layer of the heavy cloak she had been forced to wear. Support arrived like a gentle rain after a drought. Legal advisors explained the process forward, reassuring her that the foundation of her new freedom was solid. Financial aid, both unexpected and desperately needed, appeared from various sources, easing the crushing burden of starting over with nothing. Friends and distant family, finally understanding the depth of her plight, reached out with kindness and practical help. The simple act of someone listening, truly listening, without judgment or agenda, was a balm to her wounded soul. She tasted tears again, not of despair, but of release and gratitude, salty and cleansing on her tongue. Beginning to rebuild her life was about more than just finding a new place to live or securing a new source of income. It was about reclaiming her identity, piece by painstaking piece. She started with small acts of defiance against the past, planting a small pot of vibrant flowers on her windowsill, choosing clothes that made her feel comfortable and seen, not hidden. The path was not without its stumbles. There were days when the weight of what had happened felt too heavy to bear. Days filled with tears and doubt. But the support systems held her, and the glimmer of the future pulled her forward. She was transitioning, slowly, uncertainly, from the dark, oppressive environment into the soft, dappled light of a new beginning. A future where the only person she had to please was herself. The gentle phase had begun. The dust of the conflict settled, not with a crash, but with a quiet, profound stillness that echoed the long journey she had undertaken. The ordeal had been a crucible, forging in her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had learned the searing lesson that silence in the face of injustice was a slow death of the spirit, and that finding one's voice, even when trembling, could shatter the strongest chains. It was the difference between being consumed by darkness and becoming a source of light yourself. The impact on her own life was immeasurable. The constant knot of anxiety that had lived in her stomach for so long finally loosened its grip. The weight on her shoulders lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence that resonated in her steps and the clear gaze she now held. The fear that had once dictated her choices had receded, replaced by a brave resolve to live authentically. She saw the world with new eyes, sharper, more discerning, but also more appreciative of genuine kindness and integrity. Her courage had sent ripples outwards, too. Others who had been silenced or afraid found a sliver of hope in her victory, a whisper that perhaps they too could challenge the shadows that held them captive. While the immediate ripples of accountability played out for those who had wronged her, the deeper impact was the subtle shift in the air around them, a sense that the old ways were being challenged, and the light, once ignored, could not be so easily extinguished. Her future, once shrouded in the uncertainty of the conflict, now stretched before her, not without challenges, but illuminated by the hard-won clarity of her experience. It felt, truly, like a future written in light. The path ahead was not paved in gold, nor was it free from the occasional shadow, but she walked it now with the knowledge that she carried her own light. The memory of the darkness she had navigated served not as a burden, but as a compass, guiding her towards compassion, truth, and resilience. The fear that had once felt all-consuming was now a distant echo, a reminder of the immense power unlocked when one chooses courage over comfort. She understood, with a quiet certainty that settled deep within her bones, that the true measure of a life was not in avoiding the storm, but in finding the strength to weather it and emerge not unscathed, but stronger, brighter. The lessons learned in the crucible were not just for her. They were a quiet legacy, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to rise, to heal, and to shine even after the longest night. It was a future etched not just in her own story, but reflected in the subtle ways the world around her began to change, one brave step, one quiet act of integrity, at a time. Her story became a gentle reminder that even the smallest light can push back the deepest dark, leaving behind a world touched by courage, forever writing its future in the soft, persistent glow of hope.